person is called. You have to train the telephone operator. Right?
Okay, I think that's a great question. And I know we met last night, and that very discussion came up quite a bit. So who wants to address that? Because does this come under the umbrella of priority dispatch? And yet, let's go beyond what might be a politically correct thing as saying priority dispatch, and let's call it common sense. I think that's what this gentleman is referring to as common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Pinellas County operates a single public safety answering point, the 911 center, and that's under the Public Safety Services staff. All of our folks are trained as emergency medical dispatchers, and exactly as you say, that they receive specialized training to receive the calls, ask questions in a very structured and logical way, to make a very common sense determination of what the level of emergency is. And so we, in a very fancy form, use software and all kinds of questions and determinants in order to give instructions to callers. But it does come down to common sense. So if you have a fall, for example, off of a roof, that sounds like that could be a very high-level emergency. That would dispatch fire rescue and an ambulance, both emergency. High likelihood that you need paramedics right there to stabilize the patient, and likely they're going to go to the hospital if they have a severe injury. On the other end of the scale, slip and fall where maybe I hurt my wrist or I hurt my knee, a lot less urgent, and that can be non-emergency, no lights or sirens. Currently today, that would be a fire rescue unit coming to evaluate and then an ambulance coming to transport. Part of where we see the future is not tying up a fire unit for that type of a call, just sending the ambulance to come splint your leg, bring you on into the hospital. And so it is very common sense based, but it's also very complex so that we have all the gamut of different emergencies that are handled, get handled very structured and very advanced way.
Yes, I trained at the military NCO Academy medical personnel, and I have a pretty good idea of the qualifications and whatnot of these people after sitting at lectures for a year, listening to the ambulance drivers give lectures to the audience and so on and so forth. That telephone operator has to be trained to make the decision of who to call and how many people to dispatch and what kind of a hurry they should be.
Thank you. Yes.
Under the Milliken plan, the firefighters, I understand that it would be a government plan, and we would then, the cities and the fire districts and the taxpayers are responsible for the insurance and pensions and all of that information, correct? To be paid to the...
You currently are.
Okay.
And that plan's already in effect. We're adding rescue trucks to that plan, but you currently already have those in place. If you withdrew EMS from Pinellas County today and took it from the fire departments, nothing would change in their fire departments for the most part. You'd lose those 23 rescue trucks. You still pay for your firefighters, your fire stations, your fire engines, your employees. That still stays the same. So it doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't increase that as we're trying to go. We're making government larger. Pinellas County is still the authority of it. It does add more employees to the fire departments, but those employees aren't necessarily firefighters.
They'll be from Sunstar or
They could be,
other
most
paramedics?
of our measure would be from Paramedics Plus.
Okay, whereas the Sunstar and Paramedics Plus pay for all of that, pay for all the medical, pay for all the benefits and everything. That's included in the contract.
They
Is
do
that
pay
not
for
true?
everything 100%. They do an awesome job.
Right.
Their system is flawless. However, they charge you to ride to the hospital to pay for that, and our system will charge you to ride to the hospital to pay for that. It doesn't change.
Will your system charge us to ride to the
It sure
hospital?
will, just
Okay.
like it does today. It doesn't change. That money comes back in. Currently, there's two pots of money in the county. There's a pot on the ambulance side, there's a pot on the fire side. And our system proposed that there's one pot, and all that money comes back into the same pot of money.
Ultimately, whoever's name is on that letterhead for that bill, ultimately it's the county charging you for that taking those fees and putting it back into the system, whatever the system may be.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah. But I do think it's important that part of the, I think at the core of the debate is 89% of the system's labor. You would be basically adding more firefighters at a higher salary and benefit cost, and immediately you'd have high-risk pensions that would be given to those employees as a governmentized employee. So really that is at the heart of the issue, and I wanted to make sure you knew that. It's a great question, because I think as we move forward and operationalize these, and as we do the costing, a lot of it, in my opinion, is going to come down to those labor costs, and do we want to governmentize that? And I would add too, this is a thing that's not been clearly stated, and I think it will have to be in the operationalization, that you could have some type of a lower classification person in the fire department. But at least from what I've seen in a lot of places where they've done that, ultimately those positions start to get equalized eventually, because that's really what the unions sometimes push, because of the flexibility of having one position. So again, I think that labor cost, higher salary and benefit costs, adding those government positions, and the high-risk pension are going to be at the heart of, can we afford to make that change? Are there enough economies of scales otherwise to offset some of that? And that'll be looked at as we move forward.
Take that back for Boa.
I want to just make a couple comments. Excuse my voice, I've been sick for a couple days. I'm Chief Jim Angle with Palm Harbor Fire Rescue. If you're wondering why I'm way down here, I'm here on behalf of Pinellas County Fire Chiefs, because the local chief here couldn't make it. I didn't know if Jim introduced me before. I just wanted to make a couple comments on that as well, and then I'll give it back to the captain. While you're absolutely correct, in some agencies there will be an increase in government employees, the important thing to remember is it'll just be those couple employees. They will come into an infrastructure that's already paid for, generally through city or fire district taxes. So what we're doing is maximizing the administration and logistics that are already in place. For example, if I hired 6 people to put on one of Jim's ambulances, I wouldn't have to hire a bookkeeper. I already have one. 6 people would be nothing to add to that. So what you want to do is capitalize on the efficiencies of the existing structure and just add this level of service and minimize just by having the employees, where a whole other agency would have to have that administrative structure in addition to what we already have. So that's where we see the benefit, not just the fact it's more government employees. And as most slides showed, our volume of calls, that's a perfect fit for us to take on some additional responsibilities and get more, for lack of a better term, more work out of our people that exist.
That's true.
I appreciate the fact that you want to really reduce costs, and I can see that you can do that, okay? However, I am very concerned about the government involvement. We want limited government. We don't want more government. And a private contract or private segment makes a little bit more sense than, and I really liked your guys' plan. I've been following it and everything, but I just am looking at this thing with the profit and the labor. I'm just a little bit concerned. I just like that concept, but I can't understand why we're having such a tremendous difference in the cost basis of your plan and Sunstar's. That's my biggest concern.
Comments?
Just to throw an additional variable into this already very complicated discussion, there are basically 2 types of transport that we're talking about here. One is the emergency transport. It's a 911 call. You had the first responders, then the ambulance come. That's one situation. And there's a whole nother situation where you have a nursing home call to take a patient from one facility to another facility. And perhaps these folks could give you an idea of the scope of how many of each kind of calls. It is possible that as we further refine these plans, because we've kind of presented 2 options, and that's what these guys do. The way I look at it is we have a whole infinite universe of options, and where do we land somewhere in here to maximize everything that we can for our community. Perhaps if we look at those 2 different types of transport, we could look at the firefighters who, and I understand your concern about not hiring more, and I share your concern. Any way we do this, they're hired and they're being paid, not by your county tax dollars, but by all your other tax dollars that are going through different revenue streams. They're already there. If perhaps we separate out the types of transport, perhaps we can somehow leverage both types of transportation to create a more efficient system by using capacity that we have in the fire stations, but still using the private sector, like you're saying, for some of those other calls that are facility-based.
That makes sense.
I don't know the finer points of this technology to keep it from screaming at each other. I was so glad to see in one of the screens, because we were doing some web searches yesterday trying to find the answer to the question, and sure enough, there it was today. And that is that the first responder, according to what was on the screen, is a 7.5 minute response time. And then the Sunstar is 10 minutes, is that correct? Okay.
The average first responders time is 4:30 across the.
Okay, wait a minute, though. That's not,
30 seconds.
okay, maybe we can't afford 4 minutes and 30 seconds. And so that was really the nemesis, that's really the genesis, I should say, of what it is I was going to ask about, is apparently the platinum level is 7.5 minute response time on the first responders to your door, and then a 10 minute contractual response time with penalties, is that correct? And no penalties, by the way, with the fire department. I mean, you're not contractually obligated
Yes, we are.
to penalties?
7.5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's far from the platinum standard. 4 to 5 minutes.
In looking on the looking around the nation last night, it appeared that kind of nationwide that many communities were doing 12-minute response times, and so we certainly are fortunate here, aren't we, to be looking at 7.5 minutes or
Yeah, it changes
or
the
10 minutes.
57% that Sunstar presented to you, that 57% of the people who walk out of the ER or arrive at the ER with a pulse. You move to the 12-minute response time, which you're more than welcome to do, and that 57%, I believe, credibly dropped to about 30. About 30%.
We're not suggesting that we go to 12-minute. We're looking at 7.5. We're very happy with 7.5. It goes back to kind of the opening comments I had about mission creep, and that is 4.5 minutes. That if we start setting our budget to a 4.5 minute response time, how much does that cost? And I don't know that we can afford that. And so, I mean, we can't afford to have a few people there before it even happens. 4.5 minutes is pretty darn quick, and it's admirable. It's wonderful, and I'm sure if I were the one laying on the floor, I'd be darn glad to see you. But the question becomes, can we do that? And especially when 30% of the calls are non-emergency. We're sending a lot of people out there with a 4.5 minute response time. So in going to some of these meetings, I have heard Senator Latvala starting to integrate into the conversation 4.5 minute response times. And I am, as a citizen, am alarmed about that, our committee. We are alarmed about that because the 7.5 minute, we think we should go back to that discussion of 7.5 minutes. So that's what I wanted to bring into our discussion today.
And I think you keep bringing the non-emergencies in, the 4.5 minute response average does not include a non-emergency response time. Non-emergencies are not in that 4.5 minutes.
Okay, that's all right, but still, the
But
4.5
apples to
minutes.
oranges. When it's a non-emergency call, we don't have the sirens and lights on, come into your house, and it's not critical to get there, busting traffic intersections and things like that, which are dangerous to the fire departments. So your 4.5 is truly your emergency calls, truly the ones where you need someone there in 4.5 minutes. If you're that person laying on the floor who had a heart attack, or you're that person who's had a stroke and was just found 45 minutes later after it happened, your window of opportunity to get to the hospital just closed the line. So that's where that scale is at, just so that you understand the non-emergencies are not part of that scale.
No, I just wanted to make sure that everyone had saw us discussing there, the 7.5 minute, 90% of the time for first responders is a contractual requirement. We are fined if we don't make that. And really, there's no science to it. That was a contractual thing we agreed upon, I think, in '97. The issue here is the current performance on average is about